Today is June 8th, and I'm Jessica Clark, the Teresa Mack Germans from Russia History Fellow, and the coordinator for the Germans from Russia Oral History Project. It's a pleasure to visit with LeRoy Presler in Gackle, North Dakota. For identity purposes, can you state your full name?
My full name is LeRoy Helmuth Presler.
And your date of birth?
February 5th, 1929,
And where were you born?
on the farm in the Gackle area.
Did your parents ever tell you a story about your birth?
Not really.
Do you know if you were you born at home on the farm?
At the farm,
At the
yes.
farm? Was a midwife present, or was it a doctor, or?
There was a midwife present.
Okay.
And of course, I had a sister that was born the same day.
Oh, really? I didn't know
Yes.
that. So you're a twin?
Yes.
Okay. Thinking back, what would you say your first memory is?
I guess I have a lot of memories of staying with my grandma and grandpa in the summertime.
Okay.
For probably a week. I have no recollection of how long I used to stay. I know I got homesick a lot of times, but I did stay at their place quite often.
Was this your father's parents or your mother's parents?
My grandpa was my father's parent, and my grandma was my mother's parent.
And did they live near Gackle, or?
Yes, about 7 miles south of Gackle.
Okay.
Maybe a little less.
How did it wind up that your grandfather married your grandmother?
Well, my grandpa was married to a lady that had children with her, and my father was one of those children, and his wife died. My grandpa's wife died, and then he remarried to a sister of his, and they had children, and she passed away, and then he got married to my mother, and my mother, her mother, I guess my mother was the only child of my grandma, and that is how they got together.
What was your grandfather's name?
Gottlieb Presler. Yes.
How many children did he have with his first wife, did you say?
4.
4? And your father was out of the first marriage?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know how his first wife passed away?
The only thing I don't know how that happened, but from what I hear, she fell down some stairs, basement stairs or something, and was injured and died from the injuries.
So a fatal accident type of thing?
Yes.
Okay. And then he remarried her sister.
Yes.
And how many children did he have with his second wife?
3.
3 children?
Yes.
Do you know how she passed away?
No, I have no idea.
Okay. And then he married your grandmother, your mother's mother.
Yes.
And she had your mother before. Did your father have any children with her after they married? Were there more children?
My grandpa?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
There were more children. I believe 4 children, yes.
So a pretty large family there.
Yes.
Do you know your grandfather's first wife's name?
Christina.
Christina, and then what was the second wife's name?
She can get.
Okay, we can look.
Yeah.
And then what was your grandmother's name?
My grandmother's name was Rosina.
Rosina. Do you know what her maiden name was? Or her first married name?
First married name was Henthamid.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And how did she lose her husband?
He died, but I have no idea. I have very little history of my mother's relation. Just never got to know any of her. She didn't have any sisters or brothers.
Okay.
When my grandpa got married to her. And as far as cousins, I have met one of her cousins, but I don't even remember his name. They lived in South Dakota and never really got together with them.
Okay. So rare family visits and that's about it.
Yes, yeah.
What did your grandfather do? Was he a farmer or?
He was a farmer,
Okay.
yes.
Do you know what type of farmer he was? Was he a grain farmer, dairy farmer, little?
I guess they had a little of everything, grain farming, and I know they, even after their retirement, they still had about 4 cows that they milked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thinking back to your grandfather, how would you describe him? How would you describe his character?
Well, he was pretty active. In his later life, I think he might have had Alzheimer's, but I guess in those days, Alzheimer's wasn't identified yet.
Yeah.
But from what I remember, the things that he did, I think it probably was Alzheimer's. He had a lot of problems with him walking away. He had a daughter down in Lair, North Dakota, and he'd walk all the way down there at times. And
from Gackle?
From the Gackle area, yes. And we didn't even really know where he was at. We just guessed that was where he was going.
He was going that way.
He must have gone cross country because it didn't seem like anybody met him on the road.
Huh.
But I remember spending time with him. As I said, they had 4 milk cows and he had a team of horses, and I remember him hauling hay with those horses. It was always busy.
Did they live relatively close to your farm when you grew up, your grandparents?
It was probably about 7-8 miles from our place.
So not
yes.
Too far. Yeah. Your grandmother, how would you describe her?
She was a small woman, and I guess she was kind of active too, and pretty neat in the house all the time. Her living room, the door was always closed. You didn't go in there unless company came, and the company was taken in there.
You said that you would go and spend like a week or so, give or take, with them on occasion during your childhood. What was that like? What types of things would you do when you went to visit them?
It was fun, and when I think back about what went on, what we did, I guess I realize now that it was more fun than I recognized it at that time. His hay hauling, he had to go about, I'd say it was at least 5 miles. And he'd do that with the horse, and I'd go along with him, and he'd pitch the hay on the hay rack, and I was on the hay rack, on the hay, trampling the hay in so he could get more hay in there. And I really liked the ride all the time when the load was empty. It was fun. He went down on the highway, and it was a nice ride all the time.
When you would go visit your grandparents, was it just you that would go, or would some of your brothers and sisters go along? Or?
It was usually just myself, yes. I remember one time, I guess it was, evidently they thought it was time for me to go home for a while again, and my grandparents were going south on the highway, and my parents lived south of this, it was a filling station and a little grocery store south of Gackle. And they called it Auchus Station, Henry Auchus Station. And my grandparents dropped me off there at the station, and my parents were coming to town, so they picked me up. But it was just during noon when I was there at this station, and it was an old Finnish man that was running the station, and he fed me some bologna and some buttered bread. That was my noon meal.
So was there a lot of Finnish people around the area at that time, or?
Quite a few.
Quite a few.
Yes.
So it wasn't just a German-Russian area.
Yes, but there were several Finnish people that I went to grade school with.
Okay.
Of course, it was country school that I went to.
When you think back to your grandparents, were they very religious?
They were religious, yes. They went to the Lutheran church, and I don't think they missed a Sunday of church.
Did they speak German at home, or did they speak both German and English?
They only knew the German language, yes. They had a hard time talking with anybody that couldn't talk German. Of course, the community was all Germans, but there were a few English people that are like the Finnish people. They couldn't correspond. But I remember my grandparents had a mail carrier that was a Finnish person, but he spoke the German language very fluently.
Okay.
And so
he was able to communicate
my grandpa was able to communicate with him.
Let's see here. Do you, how would you say your grandparents influenced your life?
I think they taught me good working habits and a lot of good habits. When I stayed there, I had to gather the eggs and things like that. They had little chores for me to do.
They instilled the traditional German-Russian character, hard worker.
I think so.
Okay. On the biography form, I noticed that both your mother and your father were born over in Russia.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When did your grandfather come over to the United States? Do you know?
I think it was in 1902.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know where they came to? Did they land on Ellis Island and then come to South Dakota, or did they come straight to North Dakota? Or?
They landed in Ellis Island, and I believe they did come to North Dakota, directly to North Dakota, yes. No, I don't know.
Did they set up right in the Gackle area, you think, or did your grandparents move to the Gackle area later in life?
No, they were southwest of Gackle, about, I don't know, it could be close to 20 miles that they were from Gackle.
So they've always been really relatively close to this area.
Yes, yes.
What about your mother? Do you know when they came over?
No, I have no idea when they came over or where they landed or how my grandpa met her. I have no idea whether, but I guess they got married in Russia. So,
When was your father born?
yes,
1890, March 4th,
1890.
1890.
Yeah.
And your mother was May 30th, 1896.
Yes.
Okay. How would you describe your father?
Oh, he was strict with the children. He kept them all in line pretty good. But he was a worker too. He was farming. Of course, that was his whole life, was farming.
Was he a grain farmer, dairy farmer, a little of everything?
Little of everything. Few milk cows and a few beef cows, and of course the beef cow or the milk cows that they had in those days, they were beef cattle. They never really had Holsteins or Guernseys or
Use what you have and
yeah.
Did your father show affection to the children, or?
Oh yes, yes.
How would he show his affection? What types of things would he do?
Well, I guess like on Saturday nights, we always had to study the Sunday school lesson for the following Sunday, and he always helped with that, and he always fed us good and gave us a good home.
Was he an easy person to talk with?
Not really easy, no. I guess I never did really have a lot of conversations with my dad. Although I guess the older ones in the family probably did more so.
Let's see here. How about your mother? Let's see. How would you describe your mother's character?
I guess she cooked well for us. Made sure that we were fed and were clothed.
Did she show a lot of affection?
I think so. Being a big family, probably not that much individual affection, and it seemed like she usually had one of the kids for a pet.
Were you close to her?
Not real close, no.
Was she an easy person to talk with, or?
Yes, we could talk to her real easy.
I'm guessing with that many kids, she was a housewife, and that kept her pretty busy.
Yes, and I even remember when she did help outside with the milking, and in the fall of the year, my dad had a threshing machine that he went and threshed for the neighbors.
Okay.
And she was kind of in charge of the home to finish the haying and things like that. She went outside where she was even handicapped. She had one shorter leg, and she was limping.
Okay. So she even managed to find time to help outside.
Yeah.
They're amazing back then, I tell you.
Yeah.
Let's see. How many children did your mother and father have?
They had 18 children.
Now this could take a while. I don't even know if we could do this, but can you go in order and list their names?
Well, the oldest one, I guess, never had a name that I know of, and
that's the one that died. Was stillborn.
Yes, and then there was Maggie. She was, I guess, the second one, and then there was another girl by the name of Clara that died in the flu epidemic. And then there was Ardina, but I don't know what years they were
that's
born.
fine. That's fine.
Ardina, and then Alice, and Richard, and Rose, and Elvina, and Lorene, and Irene. They were twins.
Okay.
And then Cora and myself, LeRoy, we were twins.
Okay.
And then Walter and Dolores and Gertrude and Elvin and Annetta and Wallace. He was killed by a horse when he was about a little better than a year old.
Really? Did he fall off or get trampled, or?
No, we had a horse in the yard. The yard area it wasn't real small, the yard area. It was a fairly good sized yard area where the buildings all were. And this horse had a cold in the yard. And some of my sisters, a couple of sisters, I guess, were out in the field, in the haying in the field. And then some of the younger sisters were taking water out for him, drinking water. And this little guy, I guess, followed a ways behind, was going to go along, and evidently got close to the horse, and the horse kicked him, and just kicked him in his face, and he was killed.
How old were you when that happened?
Pardon?
How old were you when that happened?
How old was I? I'm not sure. That was in 1941 when it happened. So I might have been
29 is when you were born, so you've been like
12, something like it, yeah.
Did they have a funeral for him?
Yes.
Do you remember what that was like?
It was sad. My dad had the job for blading county roads. Those county roads were put out on bids for blading to keep them maintained. And my dad had a certain number of miles that he had for maintaining, and he was out blading, and some of us kids had to go along when he was blading. That if the blader dug out some rocks, if there were rocks on the road, we had to throw off the rocks.
Okay.
So I was along with him that day, and my older brother, I don't know what kind of job he had that day, but he came and told us about it. So he took over the blader, and my dad went home, and they rushed the baby to the doctor, but he was dead when they got there. And they got the casket, and this was in the summertime, of course, and they kept them in the basement in that casket till the date of the funeral was. And I don't remember how many days that was, but.
Yeah. And where is your brother buried?
He is buried at, there's a cemetery about 5-6 miles down south of here. There was a church there, our home church, and that is where he is buried. And my parents are buried there too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thinking back to your parents, who would you say was the stricter of the two, your dad or your mom?
Well, I guess my dad. My mom kept us in order too, but it wasn't as serious. When Dad said, "You do this" or "You don't do that," we knew that was the word.
He laid the law down. He laid the law down.
Yes. Where my mother wasn't that serious. She'd tell us that we were doing wrong or whatever, but she just wasn't as serious about it.
When you think about your parents as a couple, how did they interact with each other? Did they have a good marriage, or
I
was it?
think so.
Think so.
If they didn't, we didn't see it. We didn't realize it.
What types of things would your parents do when they weren't working out on the farm or doing the housework? Would they do anything, any type of pastime activities?
The only things I can remember is some evenings, especially in the wintertime, probably go to the neighbors, visit, or Sunday afternoon, visit. Or if there was a celebration someplace, say a fair or something, they would go to those places once in a while. But that big a family, I don't know how they chose who could go along and who had to stay at home.
How did you guys get to a place?
I really don't know how they decided that.
Let's see. Were all of your brothers and sisters born in the Gackle area on the farm, or?
Yes.
How far did they live? How far was the farm from Gackle?
I think about 12 miles, 13,
Okay.
12 or 13 miles.
You have two sets of twins in your family too, huh?
Yes, yeah.
Do you know any interesting stories about any of the births of the children, or is anything unusual? Do you know, or just pretty?
Not really. No.
Growing up, how did you get along with 17, or well, I guess it'd been 15 brothers and sisters?
I guess I never was at home when they were all home at one time.
Okay.
When I was born, some of my older sisters were married already. And, we had our arguments and fights, but on average, I guess we got along all right.
Who were your closest brothers and sisters with so many kids? Was there a few that you hung out more with?
Well, my brother that was right under me, I guess, we were pretty close. In fact, I was closer with him than with my sister, my twin sister.
Okay.
Yeah.
Probably because you were boys and into
I
the
suppose,
States.
yeah, yes.
Was there any competition between you and any of your brothers and sisters? Did you ever compete for things?
Maybe somewhat, yeah.
Did any of you ever get into some mischief around the farm?
Maybe a lot of things that we didn't get caught with. But,
like what types of things?
Like some Sunday afternoons when the parents were gone, we'd take the truck and go visiting with the neighbors.
Yeah, they wouldn't like that too much.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of answers my next question. What types of things did you and your brothers and sisters do when left home alone? Let's see. Can you tell me more about your younger brother who you were really close to? What was he like when you were growing up?
I guess we just got along pretty good. Did things together. Sunday afternoons, we'd probably go to the neighbor's place, visit with their kids or play with their kids. That was very common, that we had neighbors that were about a mile from our place, and they had two boys close to our age, and we did that a lot. In the summertime especially, I don't think there were very many Sundays that we either didn't go to their place or they came to our place walking or
children. Do you know what how old was the oldest and how young was the youngest? What's the age span there that you have? Do you know?
My oldest sister that is living yet,
Mm-hmm.
she was born in 1912,
Okay.
and I think my brother that was killed, he was born in 1941.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's quite an age
Spread. Yes.
I was just thinking of that's a lot of kids. Let's see. When you were growing up, how many of your brothers and sisters actually lived with you in the house?
I guess the most probably 13.
13. Now here's a good question. What type of house did you have that fit 13 kids?
Well, it seemed like a big house, but there was always at least 3 to a bed.
3 to a bed.
Yes.
How many bedrooms were there in the house?
I guess 4 bedrooms. Yes. With my parents' bedroom.
So then, would there be like 2 beds in a room, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you describe the layout of the house? What did the house look like?
It was a 2-story house, and it pretty square, rectangular, but each side was about the same length.
Okay.
And there were 3 rooms upstairs and 4 rooms downstairs.
Were the 3 rooms upstairs the kids' rooms?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Did you have a basement?
Yes. It was a basement. It was a a building that at one time it was a railroad. The railroad in those days had excuse me, had houses that for their people to sleep, like in Gackle.
Oh.
The workers on the railroad, they
Okay.
slept in those houses. And when those houses were sold, my dad bought that house in Gackle and moved it out. So it was a fairly good sized house, but the one thing that always amazes me, at one time we had a married teacher in board. It was for two school seasons or 2 years that they lived, and he had a family of 3 children living in the same house.
Oh my goodness.
Where we all slept, I don't know, but they had rented 1 room upstairs, and the house had a door at the end of the stairway that went outside, one door that went outside and one that went into the main house. So they had pretty much had their
own
place where they.
What was the furniture like in your house? What type of furniture did you have?
It was not real fancy furniture.
How did your family heat the house? Did they keep the rooms warm? How did they keep the rooms warm?
Downstairs was pretty comfortable, but upstairs got pretty cold sometimes. They had a furnace in the basement that was hooked up, but somehow it probably wasn't really hooked up right or something. They replaced the furnace and had a professional do the hookup and everything. And after that, the house was a lot more comfortable.
Did your family live in that house until you were an adult? Like, did you live there your entire life, or did you ever move?
My entire life, but I guess before my time they had a different house that might.
Your dad bought that.
Yeah.
Okay. Were there any nicknames in your family, or did you all go by
Nicknames? Oh, yes. The two twins, they were always the Honeys.
the Honeys?
Yeah. And my nickname was Sonny.
Sonny, why Sonny?
And my brother right below me, he was Honey Boy.
Honey Boy. How did these nicknames come about?
I don't know.
No.
No.
You have the Honeys,
But-
Honey Boy, and Sonny.
But I know my brother, right under me, was favored a lot by my mother.
Was he the?
So.
He wasn't the youngest then.
The youngest one was the one that was killed by the
And
horse.
then was your brother under you the second youngest one?
No,
No, so there's still more.
there were some more girls and
Okay.
below.
How many boys were there in your family?
There was five boys.
Mostly
Yeah.
females.
Pardon?
Mostly females.
Yes, yes.
What language did you speak at home?
German.
German.
I had to learn the English language when I started school.
Okay. Did your mom and dad know how to speak English, or?
Fairly well, yeah. They not too well, especially my dad. My mother could speak it better than my dad did.
How did your parents feel about the children speaking English at home once they started school and started learning English?
I guess at home we still
Spoke German.
spoke German, yeah.
Who did what around the house when you were a child? Would you all have certain chores, and what were they?
I think everybody had to do what there was to be done. I don't think they were assigned to anything special.
Would the boys also help in the kitchen, or that was just a female aspect, or?
There was enough girls there that could take care of that. But the girls did have to work outside too.
Did your mother have a pretty large garden?
Pretty large, yeah.
What types of things would she grow in the garden?
Oh, potatoes and watermelons and all kinds of melons and lettuce and radish and cucumbers.
Did you have to help tend to the garden when you were growing up?
Oh yes, I had to do some weed pulling and hoeing.
Did your father ever help around the house, or was he simply out in the? It's not simply, but was he mainly out in the farm?
He was mainly out in the farm, yeah.
Okay. What were some of the outdoor responsibilities that you had to do when you were growing up? Outdoor chores and things you had to do.
Well, I had to help with the milking, cleaning the barn, feeding the horses and the cattle. The cattle were always, during the winter time, they were pretty well kept inside in the barn. So there's a lot of manure to haul out,
That's not a fun job.
also had some sheep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. What chores did you especially dislike doing? You just dreaded doing.
Maybe cleaning barn.
Can you describe the differences between summer chores and winter chores? What were some of the differences that you had between?
Well, in the wintertime, there was more feeding the cattle and cleaning the barn, where in the summertime the cattle and the horses were out in the pasture. So you really didn't have to do much feeding there. And with the milking too, it was a little different in the summertime. A lot of times, or most of the times in the summertime, we milked the cows outside. They were trained that you could walk up to them and they'd stay standing. You could milk them.
Did your parents ever hire out some of the kids to neighbors since you had so many to go help them on the farm? And
Yes, my older sisters especially, they were hired out once in a while, and my brother was hired out one year too, my younger brother, and my older brother, I guess I don't know if you've heard of the CCCs.
Yep.
He went to work with the CCCs. And one winter, the year after I graduated from grade school, neighbor had broken his leg, and I was hired out to help him with his work.
What types of things would you do to help him out? Do the same type of things that
Same thing what we did at home, take care of the cattle and the horses.
Did your family ever go on a family outing as a group together anywhere, like fishing or on a picnic or?
Probably not the whole family, but northwest of Streeter there was what they called Salt Lake.
Yeah, we went up there and saw that yesterday.
Were you?
Yeah, we went up to take pictures of it.
Mm-hmm. We'd go up there sometimes in the summertime, my mom and dad, and like I said before, I don't know how they chose which ones could go along and which had to stay at home.
Who did the best work that week?
Probably.
What types of things would you do out at Salt Lake?
Mostly play in the water. Never learned how to swim, but just kind of play in the water.
Let's see here. When you were a child, who did you primarily play with? Your brothers and sisters, I'd imagine, with so many kids.
My younger brother, that was younger than I am.
Did your mother and father play with you when you were a kid, or were they mainly? Did they separate themselves, or did they interact during pastime?
Oh, I guess sometimes if we played a game like Monopoly or something like that,
Okay.
my mother would join more so than my dad, I guess. My dad would, in the evenings in the wintertime, read the Bible or things like that.
Besides Monopoly, were there any other indoor games that you would play as a child?
Dominoes, I guess, and I can't remember the name of some of those games that we did play.
How about what were the outdoor types of games that you would play, outdoor activities you'd play as a kid?
Well, I guess when our neighbor boys and us got together, some of the boys were the horses, and then there was one that was the driver of the horses. Play horses.
Where was your favorite place to play? Where would you like to go to play games and stuff with your friends and your brother?
I guess those neighbors, they were probably the most favorite.
Okay. Did you have any pets when you were growing up?
No.
How about any organized sports? Did you play any organized sports when you were growing up?
4-H, but never was really strong in it that I had any projects or anything.
Just something you did.
Yes.
Did your mom or your older sisters ever tell you some childhood stories when you were growing up, like read you a book or anything like that?
They probably did. I don't remember.
Do you recall any fairy tales that you grew up with?
Not very well anymore, anyhow. I can't remember.
Any superstitions or scary stories? Did you grow up with any superstitions or scary stories?
I'm sure there were some.
What about a favorite song? Did you grow up with a favorite song when you were a kid?
There were quite a few country western songs that I liked very well. Roy Acuff, I always liked his songs that he played, like The Great Speckled Bird and some of those songs.
Did anybody in your house play a musical instrument when you were growing up?
Some of the girls took some piano lessons.
Okay.
They had a piano in the house. They did some of that. And I guess before my time, from what I've been told anyhow, my dad used to play the violin or fiddle.
Okay, but he never played it when you were, that you can remember?
Not that I remember. I guess from the stories I hear, he even played for dances with groups. Yeah.
Did you ever learn to play an instrument?
The harmonica.
Really?
Yeah.
Were you self-taught or?
Yeah. Yes.
Did you or your family ever go hunting? Was it when you were a child?
I did a little bit once in a while. Not very much.
What types of things would you hunt?
For upland game.
Upland game.
Yes. And of course, as kids, we did gopher trapping.
What about fishing? Did you ever go fishing when you were a child?
Once in a great while, we went. I had a sister that lived down at LeRoy.
Okay.
And there's kind of a dam there, or a drop-off in the river. And we were able to use a net to net some fish. But
Okay. How often did you go to church when you were a child?
pretty much every Sunday.
Every Sunday.
But
And you mentioned that your grandparents were Lutheran. Were you raised Lutheran?
no, my folks went to the Congregational Church.
How did that happen? Do you know? Or?
From what I gather, the church was so close to home, we didn't even need a car to go to church.
Oh, okay.
And I think that probably was part of it.
With so many kids, easy to get to.
Right. We never waited for one another to be ready to go to church. When we were ready to go to church, we'd take off and go to church.
Okay. How important was religion religion and church in your family when you were growing up?
It was very important to us.
What were some of the religious activities that you would participate in as a child?
The Christmas program.
Okay.
I think that, of course, confirmation school. I think that's about the extent of it.
What were Christmas programs typically like? What types of things would you do?
They were all in German. We'd have a little verse that we'd memorize and that we had to recite. There weren't really any dialogues that I remember. It was mostly singing and little verses we'd memorize.
What was confirmation like for you?
We had to study the catechism, I don't know, probably 2 years before we got confirmed. But we studied the catechism at home and also at Sunday school, at church. And then after the 2 years, we had, I think it was 2 weeks of confirmation school in town, where we were a 4-point parish, Gackle, and then our country church, and Judd and Alfred. They were all a 4-point parish, and these four churches would all get together for about 2 weeks for confirmation school. You know, there were about, I think, 32 in my confirmation class.
That's a lot. Okay. Then on confirmation day, then would all of those churches have service in one?
Everything in one. It was in the school gym.
In the school gym.
Where they had confirmation.
Okay.
Sunday.
Was that pretty intimidating for you, getting up in front of so many people?
I don't remember that it was.
Okay.
Yes. We had to memorize the catechism, and the pastor would ask us a question out of the catechism, but we never knew what question we'd be asked. So.
Okay. That would be kind of nervous.
Yes.
Did some of your brothers and sisters go through confirmation with you?
My twin sister, yes.
And about how old were you when you went through it?
I think we were 15 when we got confirmed. They only had confirmation school every 2 years. Yeah.
Was the pastor through confirmation, was he like strict, or was he very approachable? How would you describe the pastor?
Very approachable. He was such a wonderful person. He was not an old man. He was a younger man. In fact, when he came to as our pastor, I think it probably was his first church. I'm not sure of that, but I'm sure he didn't have very much experience yet before he came to our church. And that was probably 2 years before I got confirmed.
Okay.
But he was very likable.
After confirmation, did your family have a celebration for you and your sister?
Yes. I guess there was a meal served.
Okay.
For the immediate family, sisters and brothers.
With 18 or 15, 16 kids, you don't need anybody else to feed. What type of meal? Do you remember what type of meal you had, or what would be a typical celebration meal?
I don't recall anything else, but I know I always liked Jell-O, and that was usually the thing that was served
Jell-O?
at those celebrations, and that was my favorite.
Were there things that your family would restrict because of religious beliefs?
Oh yes, my parents did not allow us to go to a dance.
Okay.
Or to play cards.
Okay.
And those are about the main things that were restricted.
Okay. Was Sunday dinner usually different than dinner during a typical weekday?
Oh, Sunday noons was noodle soup.
Noodle soup.
Either noodle soup or the broth. They had some crackers that they put yourself. Yes, yeah, you know, a lot of times sitting someplace, and like in the summertime, I guess kids would be playing outside, either with the neighbor kids or by ourselves.
The nearest church was your church from your house, wasn't it?
Yes.
That's why your parents went.
Yes, and that was very close to the where we lived, our farm.
Is that church still standing today?
No.
Were the worships and prayers in German when you were a child?
Yes, my confirmation was in German. I learned the catechism in German, memorized it in German.
Do you remember about how old you were when the church switched to English? Church services turned to English?
I think I probably was in my late teens. Okay. And even then, some Sundays there was usually 1 month or 1 day of the month, one Sunday, that they had German services.
Oh, okay. So they would do a couple English and then have a German.
Yeah.
What was a typical funeral like back then? What were the traditions that you would do for a funeral?
I don't remember that too well. I don't think that there was much change from what they're like today. Okay. Of course, the earlier ones were in German. The services were in German. But most of the churches had cemetery right alongside the church. Okay. So after the service in the church, they went out to the cemetery and had services there.
Do you know how word would spread about a death? Like how people would find out about the funeral services? And
telephone, I guess, and distant relatives by telegram.
Okay.
Or
did your family have a telephone?
Yes, we had a telephone that was owned by those that had the telephone. Okay. And it was no dial. It was a ringing crank. Yeah. Your telephone, instead of a number, you had probably a short and a long, or two short and a long, and you had to remember what each person's their ring was. Oh, okay. How you would call them. You didn't have no telephone numbers, and there was a central station in town, and the lady that operated that, we had to go through her to make a long distance call. Okay. And she, if you didn't know the ring for a certain person, she'd usually know the ring, yeah. But if you wanted to make a long distance call, you'd have to have the number to get the long distance call
Would
through.
your family make long distance calls then, or was that?
Very few. Very few, yes.
Did you use the phone quite often when you were, did your family rely on the phone quite often, or was it just something that you'd use occasionally?
It was not used as much as it is nowadays, but it,
Yeah.
it was used quite often, but it was a party line.
Okay.
Everybody on the line could hear your conversation, and you knew that there were a lot of people listening in, so you never discussed anything personal.
Okay. What was your favorite holiday when you were growing up?
Christmas.
Christmas. How did your family celebrate Christmas?
Well, we had the Christmas program at school, and I had a sister that went to Michigan. There were some neighbor girls that had moved to Michigan. I don't know how they got her about going down there, and they came to visit, and my sister decided she'd go down there too to work, and she would send us Christmas gifts all in one box, and that was really exciting to open that box to see what gifts we'd be getting.
Did your family have a Christmas tree?
I don't remember having a Christmas tree.
What types of things did you do for your school program for Christmas?
We sometimes had a Christmas program too at school. The last day of when Christmas vacation started, put on the Christmas program. Sometimes it was in the afternoon, and sometimes it was in the evening, and a lot of people, parents would come for the Christmas program.
Okay. Let's see. What type of food would your family have for Christmas dinner? A traditional Christmas dinner.
I don't remember. I suppose noodle soup like on Sundays.
Okay.
And there always was at least 2 days of Christmas. The day after Christmas was also spent as a holiday.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you do anything for Christmas Eve?
Go to a Christmas program.
Christmas
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
Okay. How about Easter? How did your family celebrate Easter?
Oh, I know on the day before Easter, if there was any green grass to pick, we'd pick some green grass and make a nest for the Easter bunny. And the Easter bunny would come, and if there was no green grass, I don't remember what we used then, but there was usually a little green grass that you could find enough to make a nest.
Oh.
And Easter morning, there was always some Easter eggs and candy in the baskets.
Okay. Did you help your mom make the Easter eggs during
No.
the week, or is that something she just did?
We never knew how those eggs got that way. We just thought the Easter bunny brought them. And Easter always was 2 days as a holiday too.
Okay.
Yes. Even church services on. Yeah.
How about 4th of July?
4th of July was a special day, but a lot of times we didn't go any place. But if there was a celebration in Gackle or in a local town, we'd go to those places to celebrate 4th of July. And I remember so well for the 4th of July, it seemed like, and that probably only happened once or twice, but it sticks in my mind that my grandpa painted his car for a special occasion for the 4th of July. Yes.
How did he paint it? Did he paint it?
With a paintbrush.
Oh, mm-hmm. What colors did he paint it? Did he paint it like a patriot, like red, white, and blue, or?
No, the color I remember best was a blue. not a real dark blue or not a real light blue either, but about a medium blue that he painted it.
Huh. When you would go on the times that you went to Gackle or a local town, what types of things would the towns have for 4th of July celebrations?
Well, they'd have a parade and probably street races, foot races, and a ball game.
Did you ever participate in the foot races or the ball games?
Oh, I think I did participate in the foot racing.
Were you good?
Never won any race.
How about birthdays? Did your family celebrate birthdays?
Oh yes, always had to make some homemade ice cream and a birthday cake.
What was your favorite type of cake?
Oh, I think Angel's Food cake.
Did you get presents for your birthday, or a present for your birthday, or gifts?
Not really. No, that was the ice cream, and we didn't have no ice cream freezer to freeze the ice cream. They just used a gallon bucket and filled that and put it into a bigger bucket and packed ice around the outside and swung the bucket back, the
back and forth.
The gallon pail, back and forth.
Did your family ever participate in any like sausage parties or communal butchering where people would come together to make sausage or to do butchering of animals?
Trick or treating, you say, or?
No, for butchering of animals.
Yes, that was usually a big day too for butchering. Usually, two of my dad's brothers would the three of them would get together and butcher at each place on a different day.
Okay.
But that butchering was a big day, making sausage and.
Would you help with the butchering and the sausage making?
A little bit. We were usually in school during that time, but after we'd come home from school, and I had an uncle that always said, "Oh, we're going to have to measure a sausage for you," and he'd take a sausage and wrap it around your neck.
That's how they could tell how.
What he was measuring, I don't know, but that was his.
How would you help when you were helping with the sausage making? What part of the process would you help with?
Well, the meat chopper was hand cranked, so that was one job that I helped just crank that meat chopper.
What about Halloween? Did you celebrate Halloween?
Not really, no. I think Halloween was a lot of times or not a lot of times, but sometimes we'd go and do some trick for somebody else's at somebody else's place.
Time to do pranks.
Yes.
Do you remember any of the tricks that you pulled on people?
Not any big deals that we pull. I think one time we went and we took the wheels off of his plow and set them alongside the plow.
I'm sure he liked that when he got up.
Yeah.
In your family, who usually prepared the meals?
My mother and the girls helped with preparing.
When you would have dinner, did the family sit together at one large table, or how would you do that with such a large family?
We had a large table, but often there wasn't enough room. Three of them would probably. There was a counter on the cupboard, and they'd sit there and eat there. Okay. But we each had our special place where we wouldn't just sit any place at the table, but we had our
regular spot.
Regular spot. Yeah.
Okay. Did you always eat meals together as a family?
Oh yes, yes. Even our schoolhouse was close to home too.
Oh, okay.
We'd come home for the noon meal from school
Oh, okay.
and eat.
How far was the schoolhouse then? Like less than a mile?
Oh, no, I'd say probably 2 blocks.
Oh, really
Yeah.
close.
Hmm.
Okay. Is the schoolhouse still standing that you went to?
Not in the original place. My brother lives on the home place,
Oh, really?
and he moved the school into his yard
Oh, okay.
and used it for a shop.
Oh.
Yeah.
What types of food did your mother usually cook or bake when you were growing up that you remember?
They called it the German food, dumplings and strudels and cheese buttons and I don't know what would you call the knifle?
Knefla soup?
Knifle soup, yeah.
The dough?
And even the knifle should make the knifle and put some bread into lard
Okay.
and brown the bread and put that over the top of it.
Do you know how many loaves of bread your mom had to make a day to keep you guys fed?
I don't know.
I'd imagine that'll be a lot of
It
cooking.
was probably a weekly chore
Ugh.
to bake bread.
What was some of your favorite foods when you were growing up that your mom used to make?
Well, I didn't care too much for the German food.
Really?
Not really, no. The fried bread, I liked that she made.
Okay.
And I think the favorite one was the noodle soup on the Sunday.
You know, that seems to be a common thing that people really like that noodle soup.
Mm-hmm.
How about your least favorite? There's a meal that you just dreaded when your mom would put it on the table.
Vegetable soup.
You don't like vegetables, or?
I like vegetable soup now, but I didn't at that time. I just didn't like it at all.
And what was your favorite dessert?
Probably Jello.
Jello?
That was always made as a dessert.
Okay.
Jello.
Did you get that often when you were growing up?
Not too often, no.
Do you still like it today?
Still like it today.
Did your family do their own canning?
Yes, they canned sweet corn. No, it wasn't even sweet corn. It was field corn that they used for canning. And like fruit, bought fruit, peaches, pears, canned that, made pickles and their own jam. My mother would make jam that she'd can in jars. And meat, she'd can meat, which we always enjoyed eating that. Chicken or beef or pork. Beef wasn't as popular at our house. It was more pork and chicken
Okay.
that we had.
Did you ever help in the canning process?
No.
No, just the
The
girls?
only thing that I helped was to husk the corn.
Okay.
But as far as getting it ready or putting it in the jars, I never helped with that.
Did your family make their own wine, beer, or root beer?
Oh yes.
What was that? How did you
Root
do that?
beer and regular beer. Well, we usually had that all summer long, and it worked all right. But sometimes I'm not sure what happened, but the beer, especially the bottles would pop.
They just kind of explode?
Yeah. We kept it in the basement, and it sometimes would explode, or when you opened it up, you always had to have a big dish to hold there to catch it. It would come out of the bottle so fast. And the root beer did that too.
Yeah. So did you guys get root beer often when you were a kid, or was it a special occasion? Or?
No, we got it quite often, you know.
Thinking back to the farm, can you describe the setup of it, how it was set up, the buildings on your farm? Use your house as the center point.
And the house was kind of in the center, yeah,
Okay.
and then the barn was towards the north, and towards the northeast there was a chicken coop, and towards the south there was what we always called the machine shed, used for putting the tractors in, and well, there weren't very many tractors, 2 of them at the most, and
Did
truck
you
was.
always have tractors when you were farming, or was that?
As far back as I can remember, we had 1 tractor for field work, but also did field work with the horses. And towards the west there was a granary. That's about the extent of it. We had a pig barn there was towards the northwest.
Okay. And was Gackel the closest town then?
Yes.
And that was
Yes.
about, you said 12 miles?
12, 13 miles, but in between there was a Henriajo station, which
That's where you had that bologna sandwich.
yes, and he had groceries there too.
Oh, okay, so you didn't
Yes,
necessarily have to go all the way to town if you needed.
certain things you could get there. Yes.
How did your father gain possession of the land? Was it something he inherited, or did he rent it, buy it?
He probably inherited some of it, not very much, and the rest he bought. But he never, according to today's standards, he didn't own that much. I think it was 3/4 of land that he, 160 acres and a quarter.
That's pretty small for today's standards. Okay.
But he rented land beside that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What type of animals? You talked about cows, and I think you mentioned sheep. Were there any other animals on the farm?
Pigs. We had pigs, yes.
Did you use those animals for meat for the family, or were they used for commercial selling, or?
The pigs were used for the family,
Okay.
eating for the family, and the sheep were sold. The young. Once in a while, we would butcher a lamb, but not very often.
Okay. What were the roads like to your farmstead?
They weren't all that good, and yet probably better than some people had. I remember one road that we had to travel that didn't have hardly any gravel on, probably didn't have any gravel on for a few years. Finally they got it graveled, so when there was rain, there wasn't much traveling done, because you couldn't stay on the road.
Do you remember ever having to be pulled out of a ditch or anything when you were growing up, getting your tractor stuck or anything?
Not on the road that I can remember, but I know it was scary driving or being in the vehicle when it was muddy, that you'd probably slip off the road, but I don't remember that we ever slipped off.
What type of farming equipment did your father have on the farm when you were growing up?
Well, he had that Fordson tractor, and he had a plow for that, and a grain drill that he pulled with that Fordson tractor, and then a plow that we plowed with the horses, and a drag drug the fields with the drag with the horses, and that was one of my jobs, is to do the dragging. And some people had a cart behind the drag where they'd sit on there to drag and handle the horses. Some of them would have a pony that they'd sit on to ride behind the drag, but my job was to walk behind the drag. To walk behind that all day.
Kept you in shape.
Yes. And there were grass mowers that he had, hay rake.
Did you ever get an opportunity to use the tractor when you were growing up?
Not really. Well, in the last few years that I was at home, yeah. He bought a John Deere tractor, and in fact, two of them. He bought a bigger John Deere and then a smaller one, and I got to use the smaller one. But at one time, he also had two of those Fortson tractors, and my younger brother run that one Fortson tractor, but my work was with the horses. I always had to, most of the time, use the horses.
Okay. When it would come to fall harvest, did your family have like a celebration at harvest time, or something to celebrate that time of year, or was it just another time of year?
Well, the church always had Mission Fest, and I guess that was kind of celebrated for the harvest, and given to money given to mission for support of places where they didn't have food to eat. But as far as celebration in the family, no, not that I know of.
Sidestepping a little bit, are you Lutheran today, or are you?
We are.
Okay.
Belong
I was just
to
wondering because of what you were raised and then what you are.
Yes, yeah, we're.
Okay.
We belong to the Lutheran Church. When we got married, I took instructions from the Lutheran Church.
Okay.
And
switched over. Okay. Because I just thought I had noticed that on this thing, and then I was, wait a minute, you were raised something. Okay. How did your parents learn about their farming practices? Was it something that they learned from their parents, or did they learn from their neighbors, or?
I think most of it, I suppose, from getting started from the parents, and the rest they learned as they farmed. There was no, like nowadays, they have meetings and literature on farming, which they didn't have at that time.
What were the fields like when you were growing up? What were your dad's fields like? Can you describe them?
They were fairly good-sized fields. I remember the one field was about 60 acres, and then another field was, I'd say, probably 70, 75 acres, but that field was usually cut into more fields.
Okay.
When it was that big, that more crops were raised on there and rotated.
Do you know primarily what crops your father grew?
Wheat was the main crop, and barley, and oats, spells. That's it's similar to barley, and yet I don't know whether it's a cross between wheat and barley or what. It looked more like barley, but if you took the hull off of it, it looked like a wheat kernel.
Okay. Did farm kids have different feelings towards town kids, or vice versa?
I think they did. I think as farm kids we always thought those kids in town had it made. Didn't have to work as hard and had more leisure time than what we did.
What is some of the positive aspects about growing up on a farm?
I think we probably had learned more than what we would have in the about life than the people in town. Okay. And got to, like, we had horses, so we could go horseback riding when we wanted to, and a little more freedom in that way. There's always in the wintertime the lakes were froze over. We could go skating any place we wanted to, or could go sled riding down the hills and things like that.
How about negative aspects? What are some negative aspects about growing up on a farm?
Well, I think some of those things that we missed out too, that the town people didn't, like I really don't know what the things are that we always thought that the town people had over us.
Just thought it was better than you.
Yes.
You had?
Yeah.
Okay. What did you want to be when you grew up? When you were a kid, what did you always think you were going to be?
Well, at one time I was thinking about the ministry,
Really?
but being I wasn't able to go to high school, and then I put that out of my mind. But I always liked mechanic work. I did some mechanic work for a guy in town for Harvester's Garage. But I guess back in my mind I liked farming, and never really thought that I'd become a farmer, but in the end it turned out that was my choice.
But when we were talking, you mentioned that your son, when he started out in college, he wanted to go into the ministry too, so that's kind of interesting. See. How old were you when you started school?
I was 5 years old.
5 years old? And you said the school was just a few blocks from your house.
Yes.
Okay. About how many students were in the school?
Right around 24.
Most of them your sisters and brothers?
Pardon?
Were most of them your sisters and brothers?
Well, some of them were, yes. Yeah. Yes, there were quite a few of them.
Okay. Did you go to school? Did you go to school the full year, or what? How long was school usually?
When I started going to school, it was 7 months of school. But when I finished school, it was 8 months.
Okay.
But like I started the fifth when I was 5 years old. But me and my sister, neither one passed the primary. We were primary and then in first grade.
Okay.
And why that happened, I really don't know. Were we too young, or being that we both didn't pass into the second grade, the
Maybe
first years.
Because you didn't know English before you went to school, right?
Right.
Maybe there was some difficulty with learning.
Could be, but most of the kids had that problem. And I don't know whether the rest of the class passed or not.
Was it a one-room schoolhouse?
One room, yes.
Did you have the same teacher throughout your 8 years? Or
no, it seemed like every year there was a different teacher. I just don't remember
The
exactly.
teacher.
That first grade teacher that I had, that was the one that lived in our home. Yeah, and we had him for 2 years.
Okay.
And towards the end of my school years, we had a teacher that lived in the neighborhood. They moved into the neighborhood,
Okay.
and she taught for quite a few years. You know.
Would you walk in the wintertime and in the summertime to school if
Oh
it was
yes.
so close, or was there times where it was too cold to walk to school, or?
No, I guess we usually walked. Yeah.
How was the attendance in the school? Was it a pretty steady attendance, or were there times where kids would be held out of school to help on farms, or?
I don't think that there were very many kids held out of school.
Okay.
Sometimes because of sickness they missed school, but most of the time everybody was there, and you always got awarded if you had perfect attendance. You know.
Did you get an award for that?
And I think we worked for that. Yeah.
Did you ever have to stay home at any time to help on the farm, or did you attend every day besides when you were sick?
I don't remember that I ever had to stay at home to help on the farm.
Did you enjoy school? Was it something you looked forward to, or?
Not too much. I didn't enjoy it too much.
What is your favorite memory about going to school?
I guess the recess.
What would you do during recess hour?
We'd play games like Fox and Geese.
Fox and Geese, what's
Yeah.
that?
That when there was fresh snow, we'd make a ring, tracks in the snow,
Okay.
and then divide that into pies.
Okay.
And we had one like in a tag game.
Okay.
That was the fox and the rest were the geese. And out here where the pie went out, you were safe if you were here. But
Okay.
to get to the next safe place, that's where you could be tagged.
Oh.
And then if you were tagged, then you were locked up in the center here.
Okay.
And you could run over here and go out there. But if you were tagged, you got locked up in the center.
Huh.
And that was one of the favorite games that we played. And softball. We'd play softball in the spring or in the fall before there was snow.
Okay.
And pump, pull away. Pump. What was the, yeah. Pump, over hill or something like that.
I think it's called Pull Away.
Or Pull Away,
Somebody said that game before.
Yeah.
What does that one consist of?
I don't remember too well what that was like. I think I've got the two mixed up. One game we played was throwing the ball over the building. We had a barn at the school. Some kids came to school with the horses, and we had the barn for the horses.
Okay.
And we'd throw the ball over the building, and then the guys on the other side, if they could catch the ball, they'd catch it and then come over and tag us, and whoever they tagged was on their team.
Okay.
And that Andy I over, yes, that's what that, yeah. That pump, pull away, that was something about, there was two teams too, across from each other, and then you'd run together and
and you try to break through or something?
Yes.
Like okay.
Get some more on your team to win the team.
Okay. What were your favorite subjects in school?
I think we called it arithmetic, but no, it's math. That was my favorite one, and ag class. We had ag class. I always enjoyed that.
Okay. How about your least favorite subjects?
Pardon?
Your least favorite subject?
I think history, history and language. They were about the least.
I think that's a common one. People don't like history.
And I enjoy reading history now. I enjoy that very much.
Interests change as the years go on.
I guess so.
Let's see. How well did you do in school? Were you a good student, an average student?
Maybe average, yes.
Okay. Were you allowed to speak German at school, or was it strictly English?
Strictly English. When you were on the school ground, no German. If you were caught, probably have to stay after school or stay in for recess.
Could you speak German at recess time, or was that
No.
you encouraged to speak English at that time as well?
You weren't allowed to speak German at recess time either.
What type of school supplies did you have at that when you were growing up? What type of things would you need for school?
We had a little notebook for spelling, to write your spelling words in, and of course pencil and eraser. This textbooks were all supplied for us, and we used to have a pencil box that you had pencils in and colors in the pencil box. If Friday afternoons, it usually, I think the last quarter from recess till school let out, it was always kind of easy. You didn't do no studying. You could color pictures or had some kind of a program sometimes. That was easy. But that was one thing I remember. My spelling book, there was a student with me. I think he was in the 4th grade, but he was so slow I don't think he was able to do the 2nd grade work.
Okay.
And the teacher had a little problem with him, and he wrote some dirty words in my spelling book about the teacher. And the teacher thought that I did it, and I got punished for it. But how the teacher found out, I don't remember that, but the teacher found out that he did that. And she kept him in for a few days. And then I had a pair of new overshoes, and he cut up those overshoes for me. And after that, I don't know whether he was expelled from school or whether he just quit school by himself. But he didn't come back.
What did you get? How did you get punished for when the teacher found those dirty?
I had to stay in for recess. The recesses, I had to stay in and study.
Thinking of the school population, were there more boys than girls, or was it about the same?
I think it was close to the same, maybe a few more girls than, at least from my family.
How about ethnic groups? Was it primarily German-Russian in the school, or were there some other ethnic groups in there?
And there were Finnish people too. Yes, quite a few Finnish people, and we learned some words from them that we shouldn't have learned.
Was the relationship with the Finnish students the same, or would there be some making fun of because they weren't German-Russian, or?
I think we were really good, good relationship. Even like the parents, the relationship was good. except for there was always the saying that the Finnish people weren't a clean people, that they weren't good housekeepers and things like that. Whether that was true, I don't know.
Not like the traditional hard-working German people.
I suppose.
Let's see here. And you said you went home for lunch? You
Yes.
never had to take a lunch to school and you went home?
Yes, and I so often wished I could have had my lunch at school too, but I had to go home to eat.
Something you wanted to stay with your friends and eat at school?
Well, I thought it was a treat for them to bring their lunch, but they thought it was a treat for, yes.
Do you remember if your teachers were strict, or were they also very approachable like your pastor?
I think they were strict, except for one of them. One of them, I remember that she wasn't able to handle the kids at all, and it was a disaster. We'd go out and for recess, and we'd bring a bunch of snow in and throw it on the floor and skate around the floor, and our water bucket for drinking water was in the corner over here. It was close to her desk. No, it was back in the other corner, yeah. And we'd go back and get a drink, and we'd spill some on the floor. So she thought she'd conquer that, and she put the pail up here, the water pail up by her desk. Well, then what we did was we'd go up and get a drink of water and bring the cup back to our seat, dump the water on the. She just didn't have no control.
Was she a young teacher?
No, she was an older lady, and then at Christmas time, after Christmas vacation, she was laid off. They got a new teacher, and then there was order.
That changed.
that changed.
Look, talking about the school building, what was it like when you walk in the door? How was the school room set up?
You'd walk in the school building, and then there was the boys' dress room was on this side, and the girls on this side, and also indoor toilets were over here and over here.
Okay.
That's the way it was when I started school.
Okay.
And then there was another door that you walked through, which was one big room for all the school desks to be set up. And when the teacher had, she had 8 grades to teach, and she had that divided up into classes. Okay. And when your class was, there was a row of desks in the front that just had seats, and that's where the classes were. You'd come up and sit on those seats for class. Okay. But then later on, they removed those indoor restrooms, and they had toilets outside.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever get into any trouble while you were at school?
Well, that old lady that we had one evening, I think there was about 4 of us boys. We decided we'd play a trick on her.
Oh, no.
And she boarded at our place, this lady, and she'd always, there were no lights at the school, but she'd always go to school before it was really light in the morning. And so 4 of us guys, we thought, well, maybe we should play a trick on her. And we strung a wire across the door, about this high from the floor.
Oh, no.
And sure enough, she fell that when she hit that And there was no school that day.
Oh, no.
But nobody ever found out who.
Didn't find out it was you?
Yeah.
Oh.
That was the worst one that I know.
Do you remember, did you have a favorite teacher in any of your grades? Do you remember?
Well, I think that teacher that came back to teach the second half of the year, I think that was my favorite teacher. She was strict, but she was really a good teacher, and she was good to the children too. And she put the law down right away when she came there, and we knew we had to abide with them. And I really liked her.
Do you remember her name?
Mrs. Edgar Geisler. Mabel Geisler was her name.
Okay. Did you have homework when you were a kid?
Yes, we usually had some homework, and that seemed like it was such a hard chore because we would have liked to play instead of doing homework.
Did your older sisters or brothers or parents help you with your homework when you would come home, or was it something you'd have to do by yourself?
I guess we had to do it ourselves, yeah.
Okay. What type of homework would you have?
I guess most of my homework was spelling and arithmetic.
So were you a good speller, or?
Not that good, no.
That wasn't always hard for me.
Yeah, I enjoyed the arithmetic, but I don't know, I never was able to keep up with doing the work in school, so I had to do it at home.
Did you have books at home?
We could bring our books home from school, yes.
Let's see here. Did you ever celebrate Halloween while you were in school?
I don't think so.
What about Valentine's Day?
Valentine's Day was a celebration all the time, yes. We'd make our own Valentines and give a Valentine to each pupil in school and receive one from each pupil. But our Valentines were all homemade. Some of the kids had bought Valentines that they could bring. Yeah.
Were you encouraged or discouraged from going to high school?
Some people encouraged it to me, and I don't think anybody ever discouraged it to me, but it just didn't work out for me to go.
Needed on the farm.
Yeah.
How important was education to your parents for their children? Did they want them to all receive an education, or?
Well, the grade school, I guess, was important for them, but from the earlier years, I don't think that high school was that important, but later in the years, I think they realized that it was important.
Okay, before we went and had dinner, you had mentioned the role of the pallbearers in a funeral. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that while we're on the tape?
Okay. It used to be that the pallbearers were selected by the family, whoever they were, friends or neighbors. I think cousins or grandchildren were often on the list. And it was the pallbearer's duty to carry the casket from the hearse and into the church, and the cemetery usually was next to the church, so the pallbearers also carried the casket out of the church to the cemetery, into the cemetery. And also the duty they had was to dig the grave for the deceased. Whether it was in the wintertime or summertime, it didn't make any difference. It was their duty to do that.
You had mentioned that you served as a pallbearer
For my grandpa, I know that for sure, and I think for my grandmother too. That I'm not quite sure. I probably shouldn't even mention that, but my grandpa was definitely pallbearer, and for some cousins' babies, I was pallbearer for them and helped dig their graves.
We had over our breaks, we have talked about some injuries, and so we're going to move on to health care. When you were a child, were you ever seriously injured or hurt at any time, and if so, how? And
Well, I guess it happened twice. One time I was about 6 years old, and it was Sunday afternoon. We had a few of the aunts and uncles at our place and their families, and like kids, we always find some place to go, and we ended up going up on the barn upstairs. And there was one place that had some a loose door laying on a hole where they take that door off when they needed to throw hay down into the barn. And somehow either that door wasn't in place or what, but I stepped on that door and I went down to the floor and broke my arm, or my leg. Yeah, that was when I broke my leg.
where did you go to get that fixed or reset?
My folks took me to Wishick. There was a doctor there or a man there anyhow, that did bone work, and he put a cast on my leg and left it on till it was healed. I didn't have any crutches. He didn't have any crutches to give me, and so I never had any crutches. My dad had thought that he could probably make some crutches, but I guess I made it without crutches.
You mentioned that there was another time that you were injured as well?
Yes, that was when I was 12 years old. And threshing time, it always took a few days till the horses were used to the noise of the threshing machine, and they were always scared of the threshing machine. And this was at the beginning. We were threshing at our place, and at the threshing machine we were assigned, as kids, one of us was assigned to be on the wagon where the grain was running onto the wagon or the truck. We used a truck and one wagon with the horses on it. And these horses were scared of the machine yet. So when the truck was full and the truck would be pulled away, that added to their fear. So I had to go up in front of the horses and hang on to them that they wouldn't run away. And this one horse did get scared, and she jumped up on her hind legs, and when she came down, she hit my arm with her hoof and broke my arm.
Did you go back to the same doctor in Wishick?
I believe it was the same doctor that we went to that time. Yes. So.
Oh my.
I had a few experiences with horses.
Did any of your other brothers and sisters get injured while you were a kid that you remember?
They probably did that I don't remember now offhand. Yes. But another experience that I had with the horses, and I'm not sure no more how old I was, but I was cultivating corn with the horses, and it was just a one row cultivator. It took one row at a time.
Okay.
And it wasn't far from home where I was in the field. In fact, it was right next to the yard, but I had to go on the road to get into the yard.
Okay.
And the road was going downhill, and going downhill, something rattled on the corn cultivator and scared the horses, and they took off on me. I couldn't stop them, and they were heading for the barn, but I guess when they got close to the barn, they seen they couldn't get into the barn, so they turned around and they went down another way and got to a gate, and the one horse went through the gate and the other one turned, and they ran down along the fence. One horse was on this side of the fence and one on the left side. So they ran several yards that way till they finally got them stopped. They sure took the fence down.
Oh my goodness. They got scooped there.
Yes.
When you were growing up, do you recall your mom having any home remedies or cures when you guys were sick or not feeling well?
Oh yes, she had quite a few home remedies. When somebody had a bad cough or a cold, she'd heat up some garlic, put it in the, I don't remember, did she put it in the oven of the stove or on top of the stove? She heat up that garlic, and it got kind of more juicy that way, and she'd rub the bottom of our soles with that. Must have helped. I don't know. She did that more often, yes. Okay. And that's about the main one that I can remember. Okay. I guess tea, if somebody got sick, Camilla tea, that, or the noodle soup, that always helped too.
Yes, that was a favorite of my mom's when I was growing up. Chicken noodle soup, homemade chicken noodle soup.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Where was the closest doctor's office from your house?
We had a doctor in Gackle.
In Gackle?
Yes. And,
do you remember ever going to see him at any time?
I don't remember that I ever went to see him, but I know my sister, their boy had infected throat or infected tonsils, I don't know, but they went to see him, and he used kind of a swab that he used and dipped it into iodine and put it on his throat or tonsils, which seemed to me like it was such a dangerous thing to do. Yeah. With iodine. Excuse me. And there, I guess he wasn't the best doctor either, but for a little town, they didn't have much choice. I think he was a little heavy on alcohol once in a while too.
Besides your little brother, your 1-year-old brother who died when you were about 12, did anybody else in your family pass away during your childhood?
Not besides the one that died in the flu epidemic.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had mentioned in the kitchen taking steak, chopping off some steak out for the family in the summer kitchen. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
I can talk about that. My folks had gone on a trip to Minneapolis with an uncle and aunt of mine, and I think they were gone probably a week or maybe even a little over a week, and I was kind of in charge of getting the food on the table, and they had a rear quarter of a beef hanging in the summer kitchen, which was froze. It was in the wintertime, and for supper especially, I'd always slice some beef off of that quarter, and that was our meal for at least the meat for our supper. I think the girls probably fixed some other things for supper too, but the meat they were good steaks. They weren't all that big and they weren't all that thick because frozen meat was pretty hard to cut off of there. But that was good steaks.
Mighty tasty.
Yeah.
You also mentioned why you were helping your grandfather and you were going on the road. You were talking about watching the horses' hooves. Do you want to talk about that for?
Okay, I rode along with my grandpa for when he was hauling hay, and I'd estimate it was probably 5 miles that he had to haul that hay, and sometimes he even pulled the hay rack home with his car. He wanted to give the horses a rest, but most of the time he went with the horses, and I'd stand right behind the horses up on the hay rack, which wasn't that far from the horses then, and as they were running down the road, I just keep my eyes down on the road, and after a while watching it that way, it seemed like it was the horses were just moving their feet. The road was moving instead of the horses. And I used to enjoy doing that.
The wonders of childhood.
Yes.
We'll have a couple concluding questions on your childhood, and then we'll turn to weddings and traditions with weddings. What was the most stressful experience during your childhood?
The biggest experience, or the most exciting?
The most, something that just kind of was worrisome for you, or kind of unsettling?
I see. I think one thing I was often worried about, it was before World War II, and they talked about the war that England, I guess, was in war. I don't remember with who they were fighting, and was it with Germany?
Before we got into World War II, they were
Yes.
fighting with Germany.
Yeah, and I guess I was kind of concerned about what if our country would get into war too, and they did get into war, and I remember so well when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. I know exactly where I was at when I heard about that, and
Where were you at?
my folks were going to visit some neighbors, and we were at those neighbors Sunday evenings, and I heard about that. It was on a Sunday afternoon when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and that is so vividly in my mind yet.
Some people say that
scared.
The only thing that comes close to comparing the memories that people have about when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor is when the World Trade Centers were hit.
That I know exactly where I was that day too.
So do I. Where were you
Yes. We were in Fargo. They have a big iron show at the Fargo Fairgrounds every fall.
Okay.
And then they have a program for the ladies at a hotel at West Fargo there. And I dropped Maggie off at that hotel, and I was on my way out to the fairgrounds, and I had the radio going, and they said some airline hit the Trade Center, and I just couldn't picture in my mind at all how that could happen.
Yeah.
And about that time, the second one hit, and then I realized there's something going on that isn't supposed to. And I went out to the fairgrounds, and they showed on TVs. They had TVs set up already out there, and they were showing pictures there. It was scary.
Yeah, it was. I remember that one. I don't remember Pearl Harbor, but I can imagine that was the feeling that brought to many people.
And I just felt that that's what was happening again. Yeah.
What was to go to the next question, what was the most exciting thing that you did during your childhood?
I just don't know what was the most exciting right now.
How about the most adventurous thing that you did?
One great adventure that I remember was, and I don't remember what grade I was in school, but for our picnic, we always had a picnic after school, and when school let out in the spring.
Okay.
The last day of school was a picnic day, and this one year, and I think it was my last teacher that I had that did that for us. She took us all up to the to Bismarck, and we went through the state capitol, and there was a memorial building that we went through, and I think that was probably one of my greatest adventures.
Sounds like it was a fun trip.
Yes, I had never been to Bismarck before, or to the state capitol, and I remember going up to the top floor in the state capitol and looking out down through the window. It just was so amazing.
How about the happiest time? What was the happiest time during your childhood?
I guess there were a lot of happy times. I guess I really can't remember what real adventures. After a while, I'll think about something like that again.
Is there anything else about your childhood that you would like to add?
I know we always had a lot of fun with going skating on the ice in the wintertime. Not that we had any ice skates. All the family had one pair for all.
For 16 children.
So I never really got to learn how to skate with ice skates, but I always enjoyed skating. Or roller skating. That I enjoyed a lot.
How did you meet your wife?
I was working for my brother. Brother was farming, and I worked for him, I think, 2 years. And Maggie's parents were neighbors, and I guess that's where I met her.
How old were you when you met?
Pardon?
How old were you when you met?
I must have been about 22.
Okay. And what is your wife's name?
Magdalena Miller.
How long after you met her did you marry her?
must have been about 2.5 or 3 years.
Okay.
But 2 years of that I spent in the service. So.
Oh, so that was at the time you were drafted for the
Yes.
Korean War?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
So we didn't have much time together in those 2 years.
During your lifetime, did you ever hear about any arranged marriages?
I heard about some, but not really that I know exactly who was involved. But,
Okay. How about matchmakers? Did you hear about any matchmakers?
I heard that there were some matchmakers, and but I can't pinpoint either of where it happened. Yeah.
What did your parents think about Maggie when you brought her around?
I don't think they ever expressed anything to me what they thought of Maggie, but I know that my dad was very respectful for her.
Okay.
Yes.
When and where did you and Maggie get married?
When did we get married? In December the 20th of 1953 in Gackle.
A Christmas
Well,
wedding.
our wedding ceremony there was a church about 2 miles west of here and a mile north.
Okay.
That was Maggie's church.
Okay.
And
Is
that's
it still
where.
standing?
Pardon?
Is it still there?
No, there's a cemetery there. And that was where we got married, and we also joined that church after we were married.
Okay.
But this was in '53, and in 1961, the new church in town was built, and this church merged with that church.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the wedding like?
It was very exciting in 2 ways. Her folks were married the 18th of December,
Really?
and this was their 25th anniversary.
Oh my.
So they set up a deal that they're not gonna tell their folks, but after our ceremony, the pastor is supposed to call them up and renew their vows. And before the wedding, when things were being prepared, those weddings, the food was always prepared before the actual wedding, and her mother must have been about suspicious about what was going on here. She asked me whether there's anything. No, I said I don't know of anything. And then after it had happened, then she brought that up. She says, I thought I could trust you. No, you lied to me.
You lied to your mother-in-law. And she's only been that for a few minutes.
And then somebody heard it when she asked me, and they said, well, in neat lying, isn't that wrong?
When it's for a good cause. Do you remember who stood up for you? Who stood up for you and Maggie at your wedding?
Yes. This couple that was here this morning that drove up, Edmund Henke, he was one of our attendants, and a nephew of mine, Elmer Middlestead, and a cousin's daughter, Elaine. Her maiden name was Heidinger. Her married name was Dick, I guess. And Maggie's cousin, Esther Schaefer, was her maiden name.
Okay.
I met Esther Clevin now.
Is she any relation to Emil Schaefer?
Yes, her Emil was a cousin, I think, of Esther.
Did you have a reception after the ceremony?
Oh yes,
What was that like?
we had a big meal. His Millers especially, they put on big meals, and
Yes,
that
I
was
noticed.
was a big meal that we had, and everybody was coaxing us. We should have a dance. We had the reception in town. They had a hall there, called it Krieger's Hall, and everybody was pestering us. We should have a dance. Well, we didn't have no orchestra lined up or anything, and but I think we had suspected it before already that we probably would have to go through with that, and we had invited a lady from Judd to the wedding, and she brought her accordion along. Well, finally we said, well, okay, we'll have a dance. And that was the time I learned to dance.
Really?
Never danced before.
So was dancing more accepted in the church at that time?
In the Lutheran church, it was always accepted, I guess. Yeah.
So your parents, when you grew up, they restricted it because they were going to the congregational
Yeah.
church? Okay.
Yeah.
What foods were served at the wedding? What food was served at the wedding? Do you remember some of it?
I didn't pay any attention.
Just good food?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember just what, but I know there was, usually at those weddings, there was liquor served, and they did that too. After a few years now, I hear of some guys that really got, young guys,
That really
at that time got a little too much of the liquor.
We're starting to hear about that too, and we were only 3 years ago, so. Did you have a honeymoon?
No.
No?
We had we did move on this place right after the wedding, and didn't have no time for a honeymoon.
Gotta get to work.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about weddings, your wedding, that you would like to share with us? Or the traditions of German weddings?
Well, I know that they always lasted way into the night. I know some of my sisters that got married, and the receptions were at my parents' place, and I remember the one that went all night. It was morning time to do the milking when
you got back.
most of the people left from our place. And I think that happened a lot of times. And our wedding, when we went to Maggie's folks for the night, and it was snowing and blowing, and we came out to our car that we were going to take home, and somebody had left all the air out of the tires.
Oh no! They were playing a prank on you.
But we weren't all that far from a filling station. It was just kind of kitty corner, and got the tires filled.
Why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
Pardon?
Why do you think it's important to share your life story?
I don't know. I guess something that we discussed at the table, that for the grandchildren to hear some of those things. One time we were riding with our oldest son, Dwayne, and I started reminiscing with him. I was in the front seat, and the rest of them were in the back seat, and told him some of the stories. And then he said, "Oh, I wish so much Jonathan, he was sleeping in the back seat, that he would have heard some of those stories." And I think they're kind of interested in those things, and just to keep the Germans from Russia heritage alive too. That doesn't disappear.
How do you think your life experiences in North Dakota have shaped who you are today?
Has shaped USA? I don't know if it has helped at all.
Are there any other thoughts or observations that you would like to share with us today?
I'm sure I'll think of more of them yet, but...
And then one final concluding question. Is there anyone else you would like to suggest for us to interview?
Are you going to Colum?
Yes, we are.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I've got a cousin there, Vernon. He'd probably...
Vernon. What's his last name?
Presler.
Presler? Vernon
Yes.
Presler?
Yes.
Okay.
He's actually a son of a cousin of mine, but I always call him cousin.
Okay. Vernon Presler. Okay. We'll give him a call and see if he wants to... Maybe you could talk to him and tell him it's not that painful of a process. That we're pretty nice.
Well,
Well, I think we're done with the interview part. I do want to get a shot of this, though, with the camera. And maybe you could tell us a little bit while he's looking at it what this is here and who made it.
Okay. You tell me when you're ready.
You good? Okay.
This is I'm not sure what you really call it, but it was made by our daughter-in-law, Cheryl. She made it for us for our 50th wedding anniversary, and I think she did an extremely good job of it. The way she put it together and the way she got that picture on there too.
And that's your guys' wedding picture?
That is our wedding picture, yes. And I think it's really great what she did for us.
Oh, most definitely. Not a lot of people have something that's so beautiful to
yes.
commemorate their marriage.